Normally when we review cars, it's usually within a few weeks or sometimes a few months after launch. But there are some cars that we keep asking for, even though we know that it'll take a long time before we get them. And that is the case with this, because while this might look like your average Mazda CX-8, a car that we recommend very highly, it's what's under the bonnet that makes this one a little bit special. My name is AIMAN ABDULLAH, this is Malaysian Motoring. This is our review of the 2024 Mazda CX-8 Diesel. As you can see, this car says Sky Active D because this is the diesel. So instead of a 2.5 litre petrol engine, turbocharger otherwise, this uses a 2.2 litre turbocharged diesel mill producing 188 horsepower and 450 Newton meters of torque, with the power going to the front wheels via a 6-speed Sky Active automatic gearbox. Now what that means is this engine is not only punchy, because at 450 Newton meters means that this car will get up and go if you poke it, but more importantly, it is also incredibly economical, with a full tank of fuel easily doing over 800 kilometers in a tank. And in fact, if you're even more frugal, these cars are known to do well over 1,000 kilometers on a tank. This is the engine you really want. But even though this is ultimately the flagship CX-8, being the most expensive variant, there are very few cues on the outside to tell you what lies beneath. Because up front, it's still the same face that we've gotten used to. So you have full LED headlights here, replete with adaptive front lighting system from Mazda. You also get the large sort of weaved grille with the thicker chrome bar, as well as the radar that lives up front. You also get LED fog lights down in the corner, and overall, this is still very familiar. And the same goes down the side, where you still have the same 19-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Toyo Proxys tires, which is shared with other high-plus models in the CX-8 lineup. The same goes for the overall trim. So in terms of the design, you still get some chrome down the side, you get chrome lining around the windows, you still get chrome functional roof rails, which is always nice to have, and you still get the keyless entry system on both sides, which uses a button. I still wish that was a touch-based system, but it is what it is. Now, the thing about the CX-8, which makes it relatively unique, is the fact that this, despite its looks, isn't based on the CX-5. The CX-8 platform is actually based on what you get from the CX-9, which is why this car has a degree of rigidity and refinement that the CX-5 simply cannot match. So as a result, in addition to the longer wheelbase and the additional space, you also get a lot more insight in terms of what the car is like to live with, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. And even back here, only the Sky Active D badge alerts you that this might be a slightly more potent model than you might expect. But otherwise, everything back here is exactly what we've come to love about the CX-8. You have these very intricate designed positioning lights back here, replete with LED brake lights, but a bulb style indicator. Your fog lights live down there. You have that nice chrome piece that goes all the way across, again, to sort of tie in this rear end design. And I do think the CX-8 still looks quite handsome after all these years. Now, there is a kick sensor to open the powered tailgate, although you can also do so from the key or via the button at the back. But once you do open that tailgate, you will find that even with the third row up, you still have a pretty decent amount of space back here. So it does seem to be quite practical. And of course, if you need more space, you can always fold these rear seats down. And then at that point, you have even more room, certainly large enough to fit the 4 passengers worth of luggage necessary back here. Now, underneath this boot floor, you will find a little bit of space, just enough for some soft bags, as well as the Mazda emergency kit that we usually get with cars like these. Although the only fly in the ointment is the fact that there is no parcel shelf that comes with this car, which means that even if you have the third row down, you won't be able to cover up the space back here. So that's a little annoying. Aside from that, the CX-8 does present a very solid package, one that is dependable and rugged and reliable, and I can understand why a lot of families opt for this. But it's just a shame that more of them don't buy the diesel, because I still think this is the best powertrain of the lot. This cabin is also largely familiar, so you get the MZD Connect system up here, which comes with wireless Apple CarPlay but wired Android Auto, as well as the MZD Connect controllers that live down here. So as a result, it means that manipulating the system and getting it to do what you want is quite nice. It's just a shame that your Android Auto does not make use of the touchscreen, which means that when you have to type, you're most likely going to be using this knob here or picking up your phone in order to type in inputs for addresses and so on. But in terms of tactility, which is what this is all about, it's still pretty good because material quality in here is all very good. Everything that you can feel and touch is nice and soft. There is very good quality, and the HVAC controls are also nice and analog, which means that they operate with a nice sort of fluidity to them, which is very nice to use and you get used to them very quickly. Same goes for the buttons on the steering wheel, which are all nice to use, nice to hold, and exactly where you expect them to be. And all of that helps to manipulate not only this car's ADAS functionalities, but also the screen that lives up front. Because this is a high plus model, it is a combination of analog and digital dials, where you have a digital meter in the middle and physical dials on either side, which again do a very good job at displaying pertinent and important information very quickly and easily to the driver, so they're not distracted. And if that wasn't enough, there's also a heads-up display, which also shows me things like my blind spot information, my speed, my roadside recognition, and so on, which is nice to have right in my line of sight. The other benefit of Mazda's is, of course, ergonomics, because in addition to the steering wheel being very adjustable, you also get electrically adjustable seats on both front seats, replete with heating and ventilation, as well as two-stage memory for the driver, which also links up to the mirrors. The center mirror, for example, is also an electrochromic item, which means you won't get blinded as you drive along in the middle of the night, and everything works exactly how you expect it to. To be frank, driving around in as many cars as I do on a regular basis means that I have to adapt to all sorts of different things, but every time I get into a Mazda, it just works. It feels like home. Now, because this is the CX-8 High Plus model, we actually get two individual seats in the second row, as well as this fixed center console. Now, this brings with it some benefits. For example, you get a couple of USB-A ports and a decently sized bin in here. You get a couple of cup holders, as well as controls for the second row heating. There is no ventilation here, but that's not too bad. Also, this car comes with a 3-zone climate control system, which means that there are a set of controls back here in order to manipulate your climate control functions, although there are only air conditioning vents in the center tunnel. There's nothing on the ceiling and there's nothing in the doors. I find that slightly disappointing because naturally these are positioned quite low, which means that getting them to blow to your face is one issue, but also simply because there's no panoramic sunroof in this car, which means they could have put vents up here, right? Anyway, with the front seat set in my driving position of about 170 centimeters, I have acres of knee room and a good amount of headroom. And in terms of practicality, again, I have that center console bin. I have some pockets back here. I've got a decently sized door bin, big enough for a 1.5 litre size bottle. So overall, life back here is pretty good. And of course, if I need to make room for the third row and move this seat a little bit further forward, because of how it's mounted, I still have very good under-thigh support and I can still tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me in order to truly maximize space. And with a seat set up like this, you can fit an adult in the third row, although only for shorter journeys. And realistically, given how most people use this car, the ISOFIX mounts are very easy to locate and the doors open really wide, which means you can put a bulky rear-facing child seat in here. And of course, you do have blinds in the second row, which means that children are better shielded from UV rays. So overall, life back here and even in the third row is pretty good, although back there, while you have USB ports, you don't have air conditioning vents, so you're entirely reliant on what the vents in front can do. But most importantly, the main reason why the CX-8 sells as well as it does is because it really rewards drivers. And I can say that in the CX-8, it still feels very much that way. This car is just incredibly well put together and it creates this situation where every time you get in it, it's just comfortable and pleasant. So for example, the steering wheel, while very well built and solid, is also relatively thin-rimmed, which means that moving it about in order for maneuvers and stuff like that is a pretty easy affair. And it's very well judged in terms of weight. It's solidly heavy enough to give you this feeling of solidity and quality, but it's not unwieldy at any point, certainly not a pickup truck. And these seats, for example, are incredibly comfortable and the ventilation really does pay dividends on a hot day. This car is just really nice to use, and I can imagine that for a lot of buyers looking at this as a large family SUV, if you're coming home from work and you're tired after a taxing day at the office and you just want something to shuttle you home comfortably, quietly, and in peace and comfort, this could very well be it. And I know it's at this juncture some of you are asking, well, if this is the diesel, wouldn't it then suddenly be slightly less refined? Well, no. The thing about diesel engines is that yes, they are a little bit clattery and a little bit noisy and they like to rumble and shake and so on. But Mazda has always punched above its weight in terms of NVH, and for these diesels it is no different. The engine mounts and transmission mounts for this car, for example, are so impressively well damped that there is almost no trace of that engine in the car. In fact, it's only when you try to really pin this car at full throttle do you realize that there is a diesel engine up ahead of you, because just just a little bit of that clatter makes its way through into the cabin. But for the most part, when you're just driving the car about like a normal, sensible human being, life in here is no better nor any worse, in fact, than driving one of the petrols. And then there's a fuel economy. If you use this car the way the majority of people would, getting stuck in traffic and doing the daily grind and so on, you can expect to see a fuel economy figure between 12.5 to 13.5 kilometers per litre, which is already quite impressive for a car this big. And trust me, at no point would I be driving this like a slouch. And of course, once you hit the open road, that's when things get even better. Because for example, on a trip that I took from taking this car from KL to Sepang and back on relatively open roads, this car was returning 15 to 18 kilometers per litre, which again, for a car of this size is very impressive. And of course, yes, every fill up will cost more, but again, these cars will do between 800 to 1,000 kilometers on a tank, which means you'll be filling up this car a lot less often, and every time that you do, you'll be stretching it out more every time. So you end up spending a lot less per litre than you would if you were to get a petrol, especially if you get the 2.5 litre turbo petrol. And of course, it doesn't matter whether you're doing distances or when you're just going back and forth from work, you will appreciate the way this car's active safety features have been worked on, refined and polished to the point that they're at now. Mazda ADAS systems are incredibly refined and very reliable, which is why through traffic jams, I just let the traffic jam assist do the work. It really does take the strain out of judging distances, speeding up and slowing down. You just let the car do it. And all of this put together results in a very upmarket experience. Yes, for a lot of people, you would put Mazda as a brand alongside brands like Toyota and Honda. But in reality, when you drive these cars, when you get used to them, when you live with them for a little while, you very quickly realize why it is that owners see Mazda as a step above. There is, again, a degree of refinement in the way everything is done in this car that simply outclasses anything from Honda and Toyota, at least short of a Lexus. And even then, we have said on multiple occasions the way Mazdas outdo even full premium luxury cars for that matter, which means that although the CX-8 is certainly not an affordable car, it still presents a strong value proposition. So ultimately, I stand behind the Mazda CX-8. I think this is easily one of the very best D-segment SUVs out there. Doesn't matter if you're using it as a two-row SUV most of the time or if you'll actually make full use of all three rows. This is an excellent package to live with. And with this diesel engine, there really doesn't seem to be much of a downside. You get the performance, you get the economy, and you still get the refinement despite using a less desirable fuel source. Now, onto that, I will add a couple of points. Firstly, if 90% of your use of your large SUV occurs within urban settings, then I advise that you try the Mazda CX-8 2.5 High Plus first, not the turbo, because at least that engine is relatively frugal. It provides decent performance, although it doesn't quite have the torque of the diesel, but it should serve town use pretty well. And of course, if you actually use all three rows on a more regular basis, then you might want something a little bit bigger. Simply because the High Plus models in Malaysia come mostly as 6-seaters, which do make them slightly less practical of a proposition. And so if you want a larger 3-row SUV, then there are vehicles like the Kia Sorento, which offer more space for the third row. Or if you're looking to run these cars primarily on a budget, then actually the Proton X90 is pretty good too, because not only is there a decent amount of space across all three rows, but you also enjoy better fuel economy thanks to that mild hybrid powertrain. But ultimately, the fact remains, the Mazda CX-8 is easily one of the most polished large SUVs currently available on the market, and it still remains highly recommended by us 2 years on from the introduction of this facelift. This is an excellent car, one that we cannot recommend enough, and it's certainly something that you need to scope for yourself if you're looking to buy within this segment. Or in fact, if you're one of those weird people who buy cars blind, this is one of the cars that you can actually get away with doing that. In any case, that has been our review of the 2024 Mazda CX-8 2.2 Diesel High Plus. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon so you're notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram, and you can join our new WhatsApp channel. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We will catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.